let's get started. Brett's already explained the use of some of our products on the new build, on your construction of new homes and where you're going to use Paintcore products. I'm going to mention a few more, but I'm also going to repeat some of those products and show you how they're used in the refurbishment of an existing building. So when repainting, renovating, or otherwise restoring an existing building, there's three questions we need to ask about the paint. The first and most obvious is, what type of paint is it? What is the coating type? Is it a smooth, regular paint like you see on most houses? Is it a textured, very coarse, very granular, or maybe even a rippled finish? Is it something that's been trialed on or sprayed onto the surface? You need to ascertain or find out exactly what paint type this is. There's a number of ways to do that. You can rub it down with solvent, see if it softens up. Anything that softens up under solvent, terps, thinners, something like that, is going to be an acrylic. You would also do a test using obviously different types of solvents to see what type of solvent-based product it is. So typically if you've used a solvent outside, it's going to be chalking and nearly dead by the time you get there, so it would have changed color, it would have blanched, it would have discolored or given a mottled appearance if that's a solvent-based product being used under harsh UV conditions like we have here on the Highveld. The second and possibly the most important question to ask is, what is the adhesion of this coating on the surface? How well is it sticking to the surface? And again, there's a couple of tests that you can do. The first one and most common one is called a crosshatch adhesion test. We've got a little image there. You'll see the same image on your booklet there. So imagine an expanded noughts and crosses platform where you've got 4 vertical cuts, and cut diagonally to, or cut perpendicular to that, you've got 4 striations going across that. So you cut that into the paint film. And after you've done that, you're going to take a piece of tape. Masking tape works, but it's not quite sticky enough. You want to take buff tape or sellotape, something like that, and you're going to pluck it across the top right of your little noughts and crosses board, and you're going to pull it off in one quick motion. So you're going to rip that off. And if you find that a lot of the squares have delaminated or come away and stuck to the back of your sticky tape, then you know that the adhesion is compromised. A nice, quick, more crude method of testing this is to just cut a big X in the wall, quite literally. And do the same thing with your tape, stick it across the middle of your corners that make up your X and pull it away in one motion. And if those corners have come away and stuck to the back of your tape, you know that the adhesion is compromised. And unfortunately, if this is the case, you're going to have to strip these walls. You're going to have to mechanically or manually remove the coating, at least in those areas. So it's a good idea to go ahead and perform this test in a multitude of areas and make sure that, well, you're not sitting with the prospect of stripping all the paint off the house before you can get started. If you are, unfortunately, that's something that has to be done. Remember, anything that's lost adhesion cannot be painted over. You would have to remove anything that's lost adhesion first and foremost. So that's your crosshatch adhesion test, or just a big cross in the middle of the wall, and that's going to show you the condition of your adhesion of that paint. So there's a third question that remains, and that is to do with the condition of the paint. So you know that it's sticking well to the wall, you know what type of paint it is that you're dealing with, you're not having to remove it all. Let's assume that it's sticking to the wall. What is the condition of this paint? How is it performing? Is it relatively new? Is it quite an old paint that's starting now to deteriorate? And your deterioration is going to come in various forms. You're going to have alkalinity attacks, so this is going to be blanching or mottling or otherwise discoloring, normally streaky appearances or patchy. And that's going to tell you that something's happened to the paint from underneath, more often than not. You also have areas of inconsistency in the paint, so you might have areas that are showing true color and areas that have a faded version of that color. Again, you need to understand what is causing this before you paint over these surfaces. And the other form of deterioration most commonly associated with external paintwork is chalking. So chalking describes the breakdown of the actual coating itself due to UV exposure. So what happens here is the binder that holds the pigments together has deteriorated in the sun, leaving the pigments, which are now a powder form, on the surface. You know how to check for chalking? It's very easy. You just rub your hand across the surface like this, and there's the check for chalking. The right way to do it is, of course, take a dark piece of material, it's called a black cloth test, and you rub this against the wall, and you check that same piece of material for chalking. So what you're going to look for is the same color on the wall coming off on your piece of cloth or on the back of your hand. That's chalking. Chalking needs to be removed, ideally completely from the surface. Where it can't be totally removed, you would then need to apply a surface stabilizer. That's going to bind it up and give you a nice sound base onto which you can apply your primers or subsequent coats or even do your patching. Both tests for chalking are going to tell you if it's chalking just the same way as both tests for adhesion are going to tell you what the adhesion of the paint is like. Again, it should always be washed from the surface before applying your surface restoration products to the surface. And to do that, I think Brett already mentioned one of them going onto new or friable plaster. You would use our AcrySeal. I think I've got a drum of it here in the front here. AcrySeal is an amazing product. Very, very strong. It's designed to be diluted with water. And ordinarily, we'd never tell painters to mix water with our products, but in this case, you want to mix water in it to increase the viscosity that it can penetrate deeper into either chalking paint or into friable plaster or friable cementitious surfaces. If you find that you have a very friable surface or a very underbound paint, something that's very chalky, then go with our RhinoSeal. RhinoSeal supplied ready for use. It's solvent based and it penetrates even deeper than the AcrySeal into these underbound surfaces. Remember, RhinoSeal you don't ever dilute. Trust me, you don't ever dilute and it just bubbles out of the bucket. So that is supplied ready for use. You could also use any one of our plaster primers. Again, Brett's mentioned the plaster primer trade. Good solvent based, deep penetrating solvent-based plaster primer. It's also going to obliterate the surface with a nice white opacity, so it's going to serve as your undercoat in one application as well. And if you're doing perhaps a shop fitting job or somewhere in tight confines where you need to be conscientious of the odor buildup, then use our plaster primer plaster primer premium. Smells like ice cream. Doesn't really smell, but if I were to say it smells like anything, it actually smells like vanilla ice cream. Very, very nice product that. These are performance primers, high performance primers. So where you can get away with an AcrySeal or a RhinoSeal, rather go with those. They are literally half the price of the plaster primers. Remember, they dry to a clear finish. So if you want to get the sealing, binding and protection as well as coverage of the surface, well, you're going to pay double the price, and you're going to pay for the plaster primer, which is going to do all of that for you in one go. So the plaster primers are also going to protect against alkalinity. So Brett mentioned it as well. This is also referred to as pH burn. So just in brief, what happens here is you've got your alkali-rich cement, and if this is uncured or if this is active, in other words, if it's wet, it can actually leach right through your water-based undercoats in some cases. If there's no undercoat, it's going to leach through and it's going to attack the inorganic pigments in your paint, which is going to cause them to either die or deteriorate or discolor, and you're going to be left with that blotchy, patchy appearance of the paint film. So your plaster primers do a lot more to protect against that. This can also happen not just as a result of using a water-based undercoat, but if you don't use any undercoat, it's almost certainly going to happen. If you don't use any type of primer or a very poor quality primer, then your alkali-rich cement is going to burn the pigments in the paint over repairs, over newly plastered walls, and of course on new builds as well. So plaster primer trade and plaster primer premium are going to help prevent that. Ordinarily, this would happen on an existing structure as a result of cracks. Now, cracks, ladies and gents, are the #1 cause of paint failures in our industry. It's cracks and more cracks. It's cracks that will cause these types of failures, but it's also cracks that are going to expose shortcomings in your waterproofing and damp-proofing work. It's cracks that are going to lead to the delamination of paint and the general deterioration of a painted surface. So cracks need to be remedied. And should never be overlooked in quantifying the work at hand. It's almost never a case of a simple repaint. There's almost always, especially here on the Highveld, there's almost always crack repair as well. So, in speaking about cracks, there are a number of cracks that we need to focus in on. I'm going to try and list a couple of those for you now. So, the first type of cracks and the most common type of cracks that you'll find on an existing painted surface, usually associated with new builds, is your crazing. It's also called mapping, hairline cracks, spider cracks. So this is characterized by your very thin hairline cracks. Now, more often than not, a good quality paint like our products are going to bridge, conceal and cover those hairline cracks that they never return. You must understand that these have occurred because more often than not the building or the plaster itself has settled, the foundations have taken weight, the plaster is now cured. So once they've occurred, they're not going to keep moving, they're not going to occur again. So again, more often than not, you're able to simply paint over these with 2 coats of a high quality paint, and that's going to seal it for you. Where you have slightly larger cracks, Brett referred to stress cracks. So these are cracks characterized by bigger openings in the crack itself, something bulging and splaying out in that manner. You'll also have evidence of damp around the cracks, so maybe some blistering or delaminating paint around these cracks. That is a type of crack that unfortunately would need to be exposed or opened up. To do that, you're going to use your scraper to break down the crack, remove any friable particles from within the crack, make sure that it's nice and clean before you can continue stabilizing that crack and then patching it. And then lastly, the third type of crack is a structural crack. So this is something you're more often than not going to find along your damp-proof course or on the slab line of a balcony. Remember, nature's not going to let a crack happen along one course of bricks right the way around the house. That's totally unnatural. So there you can almost guarantee that it's a result of movement in the building, movement in the substrate, and this movement needs to be accommodated for. To do that on an existing structure, your options more often than not are to cut in with an angle grinder along the length of that crack right back to the brickwork. You can, should your client not want to see the expansion joint that you've created, you can cork it to a flush finish. To do that, you would use a high quality polyurethane caulking solution which can be painted over, but more importantly it's waterproof and it's flexible and it sticks to anything, and it's going to help allow the movement which is inevitable. If you've got slabs or tie-ins on buildings, you're going to have differing rates of flex and movement on that building, and so you need to make sure that you've made allowances for that movement that isn't going to crack and then compromise the paint that you've applied. So that's your structural crack. Almost always with cracks of this nature and your stress cracks, you're going to have biocontaminant. So biocontaminant comes in a few forms. Here on the high felt, most typically you're going to have your algae, which is going to occur on the north and west facades of a building. The reason for that is algae loves water and algae loves sun. So I'm sure you've all seen your green spongy type algae building up on brickwork around your outside taps and that type of thing. This is algae. Algae needs to be cleaned, removed, and the surface neutralized. You cannot simply paint over it. If you do so, you're feeding it water and it's going to continue to proliferate or to grow under any new paint film applied. Conversely, on the west and southern facades of a house, you're more likely to have fungus. So fungus, most of you know it as mushrooms, but remember a lot of these things are microscopic. So fungus is pretty easy to see when it's growing, but if you have black staining or any other type of sediment buildup in an area in the shade, know that there's very likely a case that there is an active or living biocontaminant there. And again, this should be neutralized before painting. To do that, you're going to use our shefu. Your shefu is the Zulu word for poison, so we don't intend you to drink it or let the dogs get at it. What you're going to do with our shefu, it's made in a concentrated form which you would dilute 1 to 19 parts with water. So in other words, take a bucket, pour it in, fagamanzi 19 liters, and you've got your solution. Then you're going to take your hard bristle broom or scrubbing brush, and you're going to scrub the surface using that solution. The reason for that is you actually want to break the spore. It's not enough just to apply it to the spore. Remember, it can be as thick as my finger. So when you apply the shefu solution, you actually want to mechanically abrade or brush or break up the areas of algae, mold, and mildew contamination wherever you see it, so that the active ingredient in our biocide wash can penetrate in and totally neutralize it from the base upwards. Very, very easy product to use, pretty inexpensive. I think you're looking at about $100 for that 1 liter, and that 20 liters is going to do more often than not a whole house. So inexpensive, but if overlooked, can really cost you big time on the job, because remember, if you paint over algae, you're feeding it and it's going to continue to grow, and that's going to compromise your paint. Remember, if you are opening cracks for the purposes of treating not just the biocontaminant in there, but obviously to then with the intention to seal and patch these, you would use our AcrySeal, which we've mentioned before. Dilute that 1 to 1 with water, that it can penetrate deep into the now exposed crack, bind up the friable particles, and allow you to patch on top of that. Always best to patch with the same medium as what you're trying to replace. So very easy to go down to the hardware store and get a bag of polyfiller. They say it's good for external use. I don't know if that's ever been proven, but if you're patching on plaster, put back plaster. It's going to simulate and it's going to look better than any other form of patching that you can do. If you want a really good, strong, crack-resistant plaster, mix our plaster bond in it. That's plaster key. That's going to increase the MPa of the plaster. It's also going to give it better adhesion in the area that it's been patched or applied to, and it's going to make it more crack-resistant. You could do the same thing using our acrylatex. So acrylatex, if you will, is a concentrated version of the plaster key. That's going to not just give you better adhesion of your patching that you're putting back, but it's also going to make it a hydrophobic plaster. Hydrophobic meaning it is totally waterproof. So water can't transfer in and water can't transfer out. It also makes it much stronger, so it's going to increase the MPa of that plaster, and that's obviously going to mean that you never come back to redo these cracks and that they're not likely to reopen. So in the case of an expansion joint, very often what happens is you go along with an angle grinder with the intention of cutting a nice neat line right to the brick, and almost all the plaster around it falls off. So you end up replastering these surfaces anyway. Again, good idea to either use plaster bond or acrylatex in the restoring of that plaster. Remember, you want to leave an angled expansion joint of at least 6 mils, or ideally all the way back to the brick, so 10 mils plus. And what's going to happen there is it's going to allow for the movement without any bridging of the plaster that can permit damp to creep up in that plaster line beyond your damp-proof course, or in fact beyond an expansion joint that's been instated on a balcony slab, for example. Again, you can cork these if your client doesn't want to see that expansion joint now been cut around their home. You can cork it with a polyurethane corking solution and paint over it. If in the case of bad stress cracks that require more than just plastering, if there's a worry that they may return, if there are differing levels of flex, so this often happens. You see a lot of use of aluminium these days, where we used to use wood for windows and doorways, we're now using a lot of aluminium. So you must understand that these things have different rates of flex. So in other words, they're going to expand and contract at different rates, and that's going to cause your rigid plaster around there to crack. So if you know that this is going to be the situation going forward, you can then further protect these repairs to those type of cracks using our crack concealing membrane. We call it crack cover. But what this is, it's a fine membrane. It's almost like women's pantyhose. Nandi, don't you just want to show us your pantyhose there? It's a thin material. And the idea is there, your paint, any good quality paint, I should say, is going to totally saturate that membrane over the crack repair, that you won't see it anymore. And what that does is it's going to allow, should the crack to happen in the future, the crack is going to happen, but it's going to be neatly concealed behind the saturated layer of membrane, and you won't pick it up on your overall wall finish. It's very, very thin, almost tissue-like membrane that you apply and saturate to the wall surface. Right, so you've taken care of the biocontaminant. You know what type of paint we're dealing with. You check that its adhesion is sound and that it's sticking well to the surface. You've now assessed the type of cracks that you have. Hopefully this hasn't blown the budget out of the water. There is another element of deterioration that you need to consider, and this is one which is very often overlooked, and that's sedimentation. So very similar to a biocontaminant issue, you have tree overhangs on boundary walls, you've got areas under water outlets which suffer a degree of sedimentation. So this can be tree sap, it can be carbon buildup around your carports and that type of thing. If you have these stained or otherwise dirty areas on painted wall surfaces, not a good idea to paint over it. You should first clean it using our Grime Reaper. Now, Brett mentioned Grime Reaper is a degreaser. It's a water-based product. It's a scrub-on, wash-off type product. So Grime Reaper, what's fantastic about it is it's got a very small coarse particle in it. And what that particle does is it helps to actively lift the grime out of your pores and your shapes on the wall. So imagine your painted plaster is not dead straight. It's got profile to it. So the coarse particles get into that profile and they lift the grime and the sediment and the tree sap and whatever other microcontaminant is there. It's going to lift it off and remove it. And then, of course, you scrub the surface down with fresh water to get the remainder of the Grime Reaper off. So that's for your sedimentation. That's for where you've got tree sap and foliage, for example, creepers over walls that have now been removed to repaint. You would then clean it down with grime reaper, assess and treat for biocontaminant where necessary using the ushefu, and then open and expose all cracks. Seal and prime using any one of our surface stabilizers, so that's the Acryseal, Rhino Seal, or if needs be you can put our plaster primers in there before patching, repairing or replastering the surface. Again, a good idea to use an additive in all new plaster, being our plaster bond or our acrylatex if you want a waterproof plaster. Okay, of course, no existing external surface restoration would be complete without assessing your trim work. So this refers to your gutters, downpipes, your window frames. In a lot of cases you'll have corbelling or plaster details, plaster bands, anything that's considered not the primary painted area on the home or on the building. That is your trim work. And very often these are mild steel, especially here on the Highveld. There is, again, a change to more aluminium, but your mild steel surfaces are susceptible to oxidization or rusting, so these need to be assessed. Where rust is present, first prize is to remove all rust. So you want to mechanically sand any rusted metal back to a bright steel finish or bright metal finish. If you've achieved this, wonderful. You crack on with your anti-corrosive primers. Where rust is inaccessible, so for example on your profile burglar bars or any area where you can't physically get to remove the rust, you can apply our RustCon, water-based rust converter, very easy to use, supplied ready for use. Simply open it up, apply it to the rust, allow it sufficient time to react. This can vary depending on the depth of the rust, but allow it sufficient time to react, and thereafter paint over it with a steel primer. You want to use the primer. Remember, the rust converter converts and deals with what rust has already occurred. The rust inhibitor, or the primer, prevents the rust from coming back and prevents future rust from occurring on these fixtures. So that's your rust attended to. As I mentioned, cracks being the #1 cause of paint failures. Synonymous with cracking is plaster and paint deterioration as a result of damp. So where you've got blistering paint films, bubbling as it's referred to, or any other form of paint delamination, you can be pretty sure that it's the result of water getting in and behind that paint film. So if you are lucky enough that it's only affected the paint and you've only got blistering paint, simply scrape away the paint bubbles, remove anything that's lost adhesion to the surface, and then apply our Damp Prime. Damp Prime is a fantastic product. So what Damp Prime does, it's a liquid white cement, and like any cement, it needs water to hydrate the cement molecule and harden and cure. So what Damp Prime does, when applied to a moist or wet or damp affected surface, is it goes into the pores, capillaries and holes of the plaster, and it actively seeks the damp and uses that damp, uses that water to hydrate its white cement molecule and harden in the pores and capillaries of that plaster. So water can't transfer through it anymore. Remember, it's only effective though where you've managed to get it onto the plaster. So if you paint Damp Prime on top of paint, it's going to do nothing. But where you've put it onto plaster, you can know for certain that damp will never come back in those areas. Remember, water's more often than not a process of elimination, so you want to try and expose or remove as much paint as possible when using Damp Prime to try and get as much of the area sealed up with the Damp Prime going onto plaster. If unfortunately the water or the water ingress, the cracks have allowed moisture or water to get in, not just behind your paint film, but to get into the plaster itself, you'll often see a more severe form of plaster cracking, even plaster delamination or starting to crumble and lose integrity. Now you've got a damp proofing issue that requires you to remove the plaster from the surface. So where this is required, you want to remove any loose, friable or otherwise deteriorated plaster. Then clean up the brickworks. It's important, again, you're going to go through your processes here of inspecting for biocontaminant. Very often if there's been an extended period of time that water's gotten behind plaster, you're going to have an algae or rather a fungus buildup on the brickwork. So this needs to be neutralized as well. Remember, to do that you're going to use our Shefu, the biocide wash, mixed with 19 parts water, and you're going to scrub that brickwork to eliminate and neutralize any biocontaminant. It's also going to clean off all the friable particles at the same time, which is going to then give you a surface that you can replaster onto. To replaster these areas, you need to take care of the damp that's caused you to replaster these areas. So to do that, you want to use our damp prime. Brett mentioned it on new builds, but in exactly the same way you would use it for areas where you now have exposed bricks as a result of damp issues. So you're going to make your slurry, 1 to 2 parts cement, 1 part acrylatex with 2 parts cement. It used to be 1-to-1. We've since improved the formula, which will allow you to get more cement into the mix and cover a greater area using the same amount of acrylatex. So it's a value add there. You're going to create your slurry and you're going to tank the brickwork, doing a horizontal coat, allowing about an hour or 2 hours on a day like today to dry in between, and then a second coat at 90 degrees to that. So you want it to interlock when it cures, and that's your brickwork tank. So if there's any moisture that's climbing up the brick and trying to push its way out, that barrier is then going to stop it. To make this a hydrophobic plaster, we know that it's been damp affected before, so to protect against this, you're going to mix the additive in place of at least 50% of the water used. You don't have to get out kitchen scales, you don't have to spend an hour measuring this out to the exact milliliter. You want to basically work with half of the water that you would use in the plaster mix you're making, substituted with the additive. And what that's going to do is give you a hydrophobic plaster. So the plaster you're putting back, not only can the water not get up behind the bricks, but now the water can't get up into the plaster and behind your paint film as well. So that's your acrylatex. Where you just have a brick facade, or if you have an area that was potentially plastered without the use of additives in there, you can use our clinker seal. So clinker seal, as you might pick up, is named after a clinker brick. It was developed as a brick sealer. It is in much the same way as the damp prime. It's a very high, low viscosity product, so very, very thin, thinner than water. It penetrates deep into the brick, not just brick, any masonry surface. So your Loffelsteins, your bricks, your molded cement, obviously plaster of all types. It goes deep into the pores because it's very thin. It finds all the capillaries, the little gaatjies and holes within your plaster structure, and it solidifies as actual silicone. So it stops water being able to transfer in, but what's beautiful is it allows moisture, or in the form of vapor, to come out of that surface. So it promotes the continuous drying off of these areas treated for damp proofing without permitting any water going in. It can also, of course, be used on brickwork. So where you've got exposed brickwork houses, we supply a lot of, we supply a old age home developer who only builds with brick. And what they do is they literally spray these houses with clinker seal top to bottom and do a double coat right the way around. And that's going to stop water going through your brick and affecting internal surfaces, which are obviously then plastered and painted. Clinker seal is a hugely versatile product. You would also use that on porous grouting or porous tile work on balconies, for example, where you suspect that water is seeping through these surfaces. I've seen waterproofing jobs which would have otherwise been a 60 to 100,000 rand retiling job, sorted out with 1 tin of clinker seal. So again, you're pouring that on consecutive coats, wet on wet. It's ingressing into the pores of the tile and the surrounding grouting, solidifying and stopping water going through it. Fantastic product. It is clear, and it also has no change to the aesthetic. So you'll put clinker seal on and you won't actually know that it's on there until you see water hitting the surface and falling off. It doesn't go in anymore. So clinker seal won't change the look of any surface that it's applied to. So another example, if you've got your irrigation in your garden, and you've got painted or brickwork walls surrounding this, you would saturate them with clinker seal to repel that continuous water being thrown at them and stop any resulting damp proofing issues. Of course, now you can't overlook other areas of water ingress on this build. So more importantly, that would be your waterproofing. So you've taken care of water which can come from ground level up, which can migrate laterally into your plaster and paintwork. You also need to be cognizant of water which sits in ponds on horizontal surfaces. So that would be your parapet walls, your windowsills, your plaster band. Any horizontal painted surface where water can collect is a waterproofing concern. And these areas need to be adequately waterproof to prevent water getting underneath the paint and causing paint failure. We have, as you can see, a number of different waterproofing systems. If you are already using our cementitious waterproofing for perhaps the flat deck roof of the building, or for damp proofing which you're carrying out, you can opt to use the exact same system, just incorporate a grey membrane. The grey membrane, very important that you use the grey and not the white. The grey is alkali resistant. Remember, the lime or the alkali rich cement in your repair work and in your building processes is going to attack any non-alkali resistant membrane, cause it to rupture and fail. So important that you use grey membrane in the waterproofing applications when using our 2K system. That's the acrylatex. I've mentioned the clinker seal already for waterproofing, so you would use this on tiles, tile grouting, plaster bands and areas which you want to leave in a natural finish. So we see a lot of developers these days choosing to use concrete copings or molded concrete windowsills. Although they are very firm, tight and flush finished, they are still porous. I mean, it's like a stone or a rock. These things are actually still porous as hard as they are. So you would apply our clinker seal. Very, very thin liquid is going to be able to get into that molded surface and stop any water transferring through it and affecting the surrounding paint film. For your typical waterproofing of parapets, flat surfaces, you could use our Aquamat. So Aquamat has been around, probably about 30 years. I think it was developed for De Beers mines back in the 80s or early 90s. So this is a fiber reinforced waterproofing emulsion. It was the first of its kind on the market. Now everybody has one. So in other words, you've got the membrane built into the paint. And where this is useful for waterproofing is very often on your parapets or on your windowsills, where you would have traditionally used a membrane and waterproofing paint system. You're left with this unsightly line of the membrane along these edges. Aquamat is seamless, so you would paint it and overlap your 90 degrees in the same way, but you won't know that it's there. The paint will just be slightly thicker because underneath it is the Aquamat, and it's got all the tensile strength that your membrane would offer you, and it's going to give you a long-lasting protection over these flat surfaces. Really, really good. In fact, it's so strong that, like Brett mentioned, you would use it to reinforce areas that have been overworked, to prevent cracking from making its way to the surface. If you are in the scenario where you've got existing membrane and you're tasked to just maintain or refit or reinstate new where necessary, and you are going to use a membrane system, then use our Aquaseal. Aquaseal is a highly elastic or flexible waterproofing paint. Comes in a variety of standard colors. We can also tint it to some light colors as well, and that is used in conjunction with your white membrane. Again, you saturate it to a smooth finish, and it's going to give you a waterproof and flexible waterproofing system over these flat surfaces. We've also developed a saturator version of the product, so imagine all the waterproofing and flexibility of Aquaseal just without any of the expensive pigments that make up the color. So this is used predominantly where you're going to do large areas or you require a lot of saturation of the product. You would use our Aquaseal saturator, which is like a pinky orange type color, to saturate the membrane and get your waterproofing done. And then of course you can use Aquaseal in any one of the colors, or in fact any one of our top coats, to then bolster the life expectancy or the longevity of that waterproofing. So they're Elegance, EnviroCoat, Ruvacryl, Aquaseal, etc. So that, for the most part, is your waterproofing done. As I mentioned, you can use Elegance as a top coat. Elegance is our flagship product. It's guaranteed for 10 years against all forms of deterioration. So if you really want to increase the lifespan of waterproofing, good idea to give it at least a lick or a coat or 2 coats at best with our Elegance, and that's going to prolong the lifespan of that coating. Right, so you've taken care of all the repairs, you've assessed the damp proofing, you've fixed up cracks, there's no more biocontaminant, and the trim work you have treated for rust, and you have put on your anti-corrosive primers ready for painting. Now, after all of these glorious repairs, you are almost always left with a scenario of what we call evidence of repair. So smooth patches where you've done repair work to plaster, you're going to have cuts and overlaps on membrane that's been reinstated. All of these are a bit unsightly, especially when you're there to uplift the aesthetics of this building and make the whole job look great. You don't want to be left with this evidence of repair. So a number of ways in which paint manufacturers have been tasked with correcting this. You know, it always comes down to the painter. The plasterer and the builder can do whatever they like, but the painter, you must fix it. You must make it look great. So to do this and to hide your evidence of repairs, we have a number of different systems you can use. The first one that comes up on your list there is our Flash Patch Exterior. Flash patch is a ready mixed patching compound. There are some, wouldn't call them equivalents, but there are some similar products on the market which come in a container. So anything in a bag, you must just know, is made into a paste with water. Water is not flexible. The difference here is flash patch is mixed with resin. Resin's very flexible. Resin's flexible and it's waterproof. So the reason we use flash patch on these surfaces is not only to conceal or fill in cracks, but also to give a waterproof and flexible solution in these areas. So flash patch you can obviously use on crack repairs, but you can also use it to skim. Look, it's not easy. It's a thick, heavy product, but you dilute it slightly with water. Again, it doesn't have to be an exact science. Put about 10 to 20% water with it, loosen it up to a viscosity that's ideal for skimming, and you'd use your steel trowel in much the same way you would on internal surfaces. You would skim entire wall facades with our flash patch exterior. Again, it's going to dry to a very hard, very smooth, but flexible and waterproof finish. It doesn't require priming, just like our flash skim and internal patching compound. You can crack on with your top coats straight on top of the flash patch. So that's your first option there. If you have only a small degree of imperfections on your plaster, possibly even not caused by your repairs, but maybe previous repairs or different paint product types being used on the wall, and you want to simulate or give one consistent look to that wall finish, you could use our Subtex. So Subtex, I think Brett touched on it, is a textured undercoat. It's got a very light stipple, which is going to give you one uniform finish from corner to corner. Where this is not enough and the texture imperfections and inconsistencies on the wall are a bit more severe and you have to do more in the way of concealing them, you would then turn to any one of our high body textured coatings. So that's going to be your Ripple Tex, Grand Tex and Satin Tex. So Brett briefly discussed some of these. I'm just going to go over them again. Your Ripple Tex is quite a specific look. It's going to almost always be client for a case of simulating what's already there. This is going to give you either a hooked or a round ripple. Hamilton's have got all the different application equipment for you to determine which of those are achievable. So that's your Ripple Tex. Grand Tex, again as the name suggests, is a granular textured coating. So this is probably the thickest, most coarse coating that we make. It's designed to cover, pretty much anything that's gone on the wall before it. You want to apply this product from corner to corner, working with a wet edge as you do with all textured coatings, and that's going to give you a coarse, granular, textured finish. Imagine almost like tyroleaning the wall, but with a roller. That's your Grand Tex. And then for a slightly softer texture, you would use our Satin Tex. So again, it's a textured coating, but it's a smooth textured coating. And what's remarkable about the Satin Tex is it's highly, highly elastic, but it's also a thick film build. So what that's going to do is it's going to cover all those imperfections that we're trying to cover, but it's also going to provide maximum resistance against cracking coming back in the future. Because your coating's so thick, the cracking can happen, but it more often than not won't rupture right through that thick Satin Tex. So really good product. All three of those are, and remember these are also used as top coats. We guarantee them on their own for 7 years under this type of exposure. So although we do recommend overcoating them with something potentially more washable, you can leave them as they are. There's a difference in finish between them. You've got matte, less matte, and a bit of a gloss on the Grand Tex. These can all be left to weather for a period of 7 years. That's what we guarantee it for. Of course, if you want to extend the life expectancy of any of these textured coatings, simply give it a coat or 2 coats of any one of our high-end wall coatings. So your EnviroCoat, your Elegance Matte and Silk, Ruvacryl, Pristina Essence, for example. Okay, so moving swiftly along to our next slide. Of course, you've been asked to refurbish this entire home. So you've done the walls. This is a little bit out of sequence because ordinarily you would start at the top and work your way down. But in this instance, we're going to have done the walls in completion. Now we're going to look at the roofs. So as you probably know, there's really only 3 roofing types that we look at these days on the Highveld here. That's going to be your metal roof, your tile roof and your flat deck roof. So your metal roof will come in different forms. That'll be your corrugated roofs, your IBR roofs and your Chromadeck roofs. Chromadeck, much easier monster. They're supplied coloured or pigmented or coated already, and in most cases that coating is quite generous and doesn't deteriorate to the point where the metal's exposed. Of course, where it has, you would apply the same system to treating any type of oxidization of metal, so your rust converter onto areas that you can't sand away, and then your anti-corrosive primers, so either your EnviroPrime if you want a water-based solution, or our acid etch primer, which is a solvent-based acid etching primer, good for coastal conditions. Maybe you're lucky enough to be doing this work out at the Vaal River. So any area in close proximity to water, I promise you now, is going to have a much higher humidity content, general humidity content, than, say, this piece of property. And so you need to be mindful of that when using anti-corrosives. Make sure you're using one fit for purpose, one that's going to do the job if it's a slightly higher humidity that you're dealing with. So that's your metal roof types. I've mentioned the three. So your process would be as follows. You would inspect the surface for rust. So this will typically happen on your roof bolt patches, on your overlaps of sheeting, areas of contacts if there's any movement on the surface, external fixtures, so satellite dishes, security features. In fact, these days, more often than not, it's going to be solar panels and the brackets they use to install them. All these areas are going to rupture or compromise the metal that it's going onto, and so you need to inspect these areas carefully and make sure that there's no rust, and if there is, remove it. Where you can't, put Rustcon on. After which, you would use our water-based primer up here on the Highveld. That's the EnviroPrime. EnviroPrime, I must just tell you, is an incredible water-based primer. There isn't one like it on the market. In fact, we have other paint manufacturers buying our EnviroPrime, repackaging it and selling it because they know it works so well. We do such rigorous testing. Even something that's designed mostly for use here on the Highveld, we send it for salt spray analysis. We check that it can actually perform in much harsher conditions than what we're used to. And of course, at the same time, we compare it to all the other equivalents on the market. And what you find is the film that our EnviroPrime makes is a totally sealed and complete film, which is different to what we look at when testing, because what we find with a lot of our competitors' water-based rust-inhibiting primers is they're full of pinholes. So if you hold it up in the sun on a sheet of glass, which is the test that we do, you're going to find that there are, in sometimes, millions of pinholes across this film. So what good is that, right? If the water can get through these holes, it's going to get to the steel. So why even prime it in the first place? So we make sure we leave no stone unturned when ensuring that our rust-inhibiting products totally seal the surface that it's applied to and have active ingredients. I think in EnviroPrime there's 7 different rust-inhibiting ingredients, from the pigment that goes in to make it red to the actual adhesion and the modifiers that go in to make it stick. All of them have some performance attributes in terms of stopping rust from occurring. So you assess the rust, deal with it where necessary. If this is a previously painted roof structure, of course, like any painted fixture, you need to inspect the condition of that paint. If it's deteriorated to the point where the pigment is now left unbound on the surface, or chalking as it's referred to, this should be cleaned off completely, and then a surface stabilizer applied. Remember, I mentioned the AcrySeal, diluted 1-to-1 with water to penetrate deep into the chalk. Where there is an excessive amount of chalking happening, or maybe a very underbound coating that's been applied to it, you would use our RhinoSeal, and that's then going to seal it up and give you a sound base onto which to waterproof and to paint ultimately. So that's what you would do next. You would assess then your waterproofing requirements on these surfaces. So your steel roofs is pretty straightforward. You're going to have your upturns or your flashings, you're going to have your valleys, and you're going to have your roof bolt patches. Remember, roofs are designed in such a way that the removal of water is key. So if your roof design is correct, water should run off it, and you shouldn't really have a great need for waterproofing. We know that that's not always the case, and especially where the structure itself is pitted or has got intentional holes for fixtures, such as your roof bolts and any other externally mounted fixture on there. So here you would inspect this waterproofing, replace or renew or maintain your roof bolt patches, your membrane valleys, your upturns and your flashings, where you might have an acrylic system going up onto a chimney wall, for example, or even the surrounding parapets. There you want to check that the membrane is still functioning fully, and then where necessary replace the membrane and give this all a maintenance or waterproofing coat with our Aquaseal. You can use the saturator if you're going to be doing a lot of it, or you can use the Aquaseal in the different colors. And the colors are a match to our roof paint, which ultimately is what you're going to finish with. That roof paint is then a match to most of the pre-coated steel products that are supplied into the market. So your palisade fence, which is in a historical, heritage or vintage green, those are the three reference points to it. It's all the same green. We all make the same green, whether you're making it new or you make a paint product to coat it or a waterproofing product to protect it. We try and keep them all uniform, and this allows you to conduct waterproofing in the same color, the same intended color as your top coat. So that's your Aquaseal. You can of course use Aquamat, so especially on your roof bolt patches, a small area, much easier just to crack open that Aquamat. If I go with a brush like this, make sure it's fully coated with Aquamat and move on to the next one. Much easier than embedding a small piece of membrane and saturating it. You can do both, whichever's easiest for you. Both methodologies work just fine. So that's your metal roof. The most common, or the more common one that we deal with and that we're out-speccing is your tiled roof. So that's your cement tiled roof. Remember, a tiled roof, very often the tile itself has been impregnated with color, with oxides. These are powder-based oxides, so if it's an unpainted roof and it's been weathering for anywhere from 18 months or longer, what you'll find is a lot of those oxides have now become unbound. They are no longer embedded in the actual cement tile itself. They're sitting on the surface. Remember your chalking test. So if you confirm that there is chalk on the surface, remember you want to wash it off. So before you wash it off, here's the trick. To do this all in one go and to make your process a lot easier and more efficient, take your Sherfu biocide wash, because just like any cementitious surface, it's full of pores and holes. So the likelihood that there's a biocontaminant in the pores and holes of your roof tile is very high. So what you want to do is take your Sherfu, make your solution, your 20-litre solution, by adding 19 litres of water to that litre, and you want to scrub this roof down with that solution. What that's going to do is it's going to neutralize, kill, remove the algae spore that's present, but it's also going to wash the roof. So it's going to remove a lot of the chalk if it's previously painted, and it's going to get rid of that oxidized layer of pigment that's been set into your tile that is now no longer bound. So you're going to get the washing of it, the neutralizing and the removing of the chalk done in one motion, and that's with your Sherfu biocide wash. So you're going to wash it down thoroughly. Thereafter, we recommend, even if you've removed all the chalk, even if you know that there's no more friable particles on the surface, apply either Acryseal or Rhinoseal. And the reason we're insistent on that is it not only promotes the adhesion of any subsequent coat, but it also fills to some extent the pores or the holes of the roof tile. So if you can fill the pores of the roof tile with the inexpensive dilutable Acryseal, which is not only going to fill those pores, but it's also going to promote the adhesion of your subsequent coats and the spread rate of your subsequent coats. So the more expensive stuff, as you know, is the roof paint. Roof paint can be hellishly expensive these days, depending on the color. So what this does, the Acryseal binds it all up, and it fills those pores so you don't bleed the expensive roof paint into the tile that you're painting. And then that's going to make your roof paint go further, but still give you a high quality finish that doesn't have this patchy appearance because half of the paint and half of the resin has gone into the tiles. So Acryseal or Rhinoseal as a surface stabilizer is an absolute must, not just because it renders the tile in a better condition for painting, but because it's a cost saving for you as the contractor applying the more expensive roof paint on top of it. So that's your preparation then. Of course, as I said, all roofs are designed for the removal of water being paramount to their design. So you need to check that your gullies, your flashings, your downpipes, all drainage points should first and foremost be free of obstruction and totally functional. Once you know that is for sure, then you go and assess your remaining waterproofing area. So much the same as the metal roof, these are going to be your upturns, your parapet walls, your chimneys, where you've got your flashings. So you want to reinforce flashing plates with our membrane and Aquaseal or Aquamat. And you also want to, like you would do with the roof bolt patches, if you've got any external fixtures, maybe satellite dishes, cementitious or anything like that mounted onto these roof tiles, their fixing points or the areas that they've been put into the tile, you need to ensure that water can't migrate around the cracks, voids or other openings around those fixing points. And to do that, yeah, you guessed it, you can use our Aquamat or our Aquaseal and membrane, and that's just going to take care of any waterproofing requirements on your tiled roof. And then finally, the third and final roof type that we're going to look at is your slab or flat deck roof. We're going to assume that it's an acrylic system. We do have a conversion system for flat deck roofs which are previously bitumened. It was hugely popular over the last sort of 20-30 years that any area that needed waterproofing, whether it was a flower bed or an aqueduct running across the country or a roof, got bitumen. Why? Because it's dirt cheap. Unfortunately though, it is environmentally disastrous, it is cumbersome to apply, and it requires very frequent maintenance. You must know that the silver coating that's applied to it does little to nothing in the way of waterproofing. All it does is reflect the sun, and the reason we need it, that coating there to reflect the sun is because your derby gum or your bitumen-based sheeting, torch on, paint on, whatever it is that's underneath it, doesn't like the sun. Bitumen was developed and designed to be underground or totally hidden from the sun. So areas like potting beds, aqueducts which are dug in, that type of thing is ideal for the use of bitumen because it never sees the sun. But because of its price point, and because once you're geared up to do this type of waterproofing, well, you can pretty much go anywhere and do it. So our industry decided that bitumen would be the right waterproofing solution for everything. And so you have a number of flat deck roofs which are previously bitumened. Your end user or your homeowners are not educated in the sense that these systems need maintenance, very frequent and regular maintenance. So you've got to get up onto a silver bitumen coated roof probably every year to inspect your joins, your seams, your overlaps, your upturns to make sure that they're in a good condition and still functioning. And then you apply your silver as a maintenance coat. So where this is the case, if you have a bitumen or silver sealed roof that has deteriorated to the point where the silver is barely visible, you can now convert this roof to an acrylic system using our 2K acrylatex and cement in conjunction with the grey alkali resistant membrane. It is quite tedious, it's worth it, but there is a lot of work involved. You have to completely remove the existing bitumen surface. You would also then want to remove any remaining oily residues underneath those sheeting, that sheeting that comes away. We found that petrol works well to do this, and a wire brush. You scrub it on there and it lifts those residues off. Rinse it off the surface, and then you can crack on with an acrylic system. So our acrylic systems, much the same in a metal and a tiled roof. You've got your choice there of firstly the 2K that I mentioned, so that's your acrylatex and 2-part cement with your grey membrane. You would roll that across the length and breadth of the slab roof. You want to ensure that your overlaps are 50 to 100 mils over and that it's saturated to a smooth finish. You could leave it like that, but ideally you want to paint it to protect it from the sun. To do that you would use any one of our top coats. We've got them there. So the Ruvacryl in our 14 standard colours, Elegance Silk in pretty much any colour, Elegance Matte in light colours, and then Envirocoat if you want a glossier, more prefabricated look to the roof, then you would use our Envirocoat as a finishing coat. So just to recap then, your slab waterproofing, you can use the acrylatex 2K system. If you want something slightly easier to use, maybe you're not using a cementitious damp proofing, or you're not using the acrylatex in any of your plaster repairs and you want a fully water-based acrylic system, then you would use our Aquaseal saturator in this case with the white membrane across the length and breadth of these roofs. The benefit of this is that it is hugely flexible, probably the most flexible of all the systems. Once you've fully saturated that membrane, it literally becomes like a piece of rubber, and that's where all these guys have cottoned on to selling you rubber, which is not rubber, it's a water-based acrylic, just like this. So you want to use this where you need good flexibility, so potentially areas, roofs with expansion joints on them, areas that you know are susceptible to movement. Then you would use our Aquaseal and membrane system to give you the most expansive properties over these moving structures and fully waterproof the system as well. Okay, so we've remedied the walls. We've now taken care of the client's roof, the 3 different roof types that were that were on site, we've assessed and we've given you the solutions to seal these up and waterproof them and finally to paint them. Now we're going to look at the detail or trim, or we refer to it here as specialized surfaces. So trim we sort of segment as your downpipes, your gutters, your windowsills, your feature areas on the main facades. There are of course some smaller areas that can't be overlooked when doing a restoration project of this nature. So the first one that comes up there is your cladding, face brick, paving, slate or slaster reveals around houses. So you can't go ahead and paint the roof and walls and then leave this shoddy looking slaster reveal at the bottom all tired and faded in color. So the product that we spec more often for this surface is our stone seal. So as the name suggests, it is a stone sealing product. What it does is it imparts a wet look to the surface. It also richens up all the natural hues or colors within the tile, the brick, the slaster, the slate, whatever it is that you're applying it to is going to bring all those natural colors to the fore, and it's going to seal it with a wet and glossy and UV protective coating, which is really going to richen and enhance the look of these features as they would have originally been instated on the house to look as. So that's your stone seal. Of course, if you want to seal these areas without changing the look of the surface that it's applied to, you could use our clinker seal. Clinker seal, as I mentioned, is a liquid silicone that's going to go into onto and into these surfaces. It's going to seal them up and prevent their deterioration from either water ingress or UV, and not change the look of the feature whatsoever. That's the clinker seal. Clinker seal is a very versatile product. So I mentioned that it can be used on porous balconies, so your tiles and your grouting on balconies to stop the ingression of water moving with gravity down through these tiles. You can also use clinker seal to do what we call a simulated or chemical DPC. So you have a lot of garage conversions these days, and traditionally garages were never constructed with a DPC line or a DPC layer in them. Where this is the case, and this is now going to become a habitable space, and you want to convert these areas, you could simulate a DPC using our clinker seal. And what's involved, just briefly, is you're going to drill into the 2 brick courses where you want to simulate these DPCs at staggering intervals of about 110 mils, and you're going to inject or flood these bricks with clinker seal. Remember, it's a liquid silicone. It's going to go and find all the holes and pores and capillaries of the brick, and it's going to solidify in there, which will stop water coming up the brick, water moving down the brick or laterally into the brick. So it's a simulated DPC using clinker seal. We've done it with great success. I've been to sites where you have gurneys being rolled along walls to flood these bricks with the liquid silicone, the siloxane silicone, and it is hugely effective and will literally stop damp rising through your walls where a DPC should be in place and isn't. So that's the clinker seal, very, very versatile. We've got, in fact, the first 3 products on this list, your stone seal, clinker seal and Cementec, are all fairly similar in that their composition or the material type used to make them is all silicone based. So your Cementec is really an incredible product. Brett mentioned its use on new plaster work or any new cementitious surface that you want to seal. So where this product is actually most effective, if you have new wet work, new screed, new plaster work, and you want to make it stronger, more crack resistant and waterproof, you would put our Cementec on. So it's a very thin liquid. It goes very far, 14 to 16 squares per litre. So although it's expensive in the tin, on the wall it's fairly cheap. And what Cementec actually does is it locks in the existing water in the structure of the brick, the plaster, the screed, whatever it is. And the way a cementitious surface increases in strength is to constantly hydrate the cement molecules within it using readily available water. So what this does is it stops water escaping from these surfaces, locks it in there so it can continuously hydrate the cement over a much longer period of time, giving you a much stronger, more crack resistant plaster. So I'll give you an example of where it can be used effectively. Let's say you have a plumbing issue in a client's house. You've identified that the plumbing is coming from the pipes, let's say in a shower. You chop off the tiles, chop out the plaster, identify where the leaking pipe is. You make good the pipe work, seal it up, replace the pipe where necessary, then you replaster. Now ordinarily you would leave site for a week or 2 weeks, and come back when the plaster's dry, retile, eventually get paid and make your way out. What Cementec will allow you to do is plaster today, apply Cementec today, come back tomorrow to do your tiling and get paid by Friday. So while it is an enhancer, we also refer to it as an accelerator because it's going to improve your turnaround times on plaster work in that way. It was initially developed for garage forecourts. So imagine your forecourt, you've got these big screeded, power floated areas. You're going to screed the area today, power float it. They put the Cementec on Friday. Monday, the 12-ton truck comes and drives on it. That's what it's developed for. That is the strength and the nature of that Cementec. Really, really incredible stuff. It's going to give you a natural look in much the same way as the stone seal. It's going to richen the natural mottling of the concrete that it's applied to, or the plaster that it's applied to, should you want to leave that as is. If you want to paint these surfaces, we have a specific paint type developed for painting concrete, driveways, floors, paving, pots, garden furniture, plastics, that type of thing, and that's our terra firma. So terra firma, as the name suggests, anything on or in the ground. It's available in a variety of colors, so any dark color that you want, which is typically what you're going to put down on the ground, you would use our terra firma. Terra firma has been developed with a high MFT, and what this refers to is how quickly it dries to a hard cured film. And this is important. If you paint a driveway or you paint a patio, a brickwork patio with terra firma, you can't wait 7 days for it to cure properly before you can put the furniture back or bring your car out the garage. So terra firma has been developed to dry very hard, very quickly, or with a high MFT that allows you to traffic the surface within 24 hours after application, which is quite remarkable. You must understand that your tires, after driving for even 20 minutes, are beyond a temperature that your hand can touch. So imagine now a new paint film on the ground that you bring hot rubber into contact with. It's going to remove it. It's going to soften it up. It's going to tear it off the surface very easily. That's what terra firma has been developed against happening. So it's got a high MFT to allow you to drive onto it with hot tires soon after application without removing it or staining it. It can be washed to remove any type of sediment. It is chemical resistant, so it can handle any household cleaning chemicals that you might want to clean the surface with. For example, if you have an open plan kitchen that leads onto a patio, if you're going to paint from inside to outside and you want not just consistency in color but in consistency in the product type used, so the same finish, you would use our terra firma from inside to outside, and that's going to allow you then to clean those surfaces very easily and know that you're not going to have any staining of the surfaces. So that's our terra firma. Of course, we still have a lot of wood in play on your existing homes these days. That's going to be anything from your windows and doors to furniture, exposed eaves, exposed trusses, garden fences. If you want a natural or preserved look on these, you would use our wood first. Brett mentioned that's the oil, so it's an ingressive oil. It's got UV scattering properties. It's also got an insecticide which will stop your borers and that type of thing getting into the wood and deteriorating it. So that's the wood first system. What's unique about our wood care range, and we're the only ones who have this, I can tell you that as a matter of fact, is you can use our wood first, which is an oil, in combination with our varnish. Now, most, if not all other manufacturers will tell you, well, it's either or. Either you're going to oil the wood or you're going to varnish the wood. So we actually recommend that you do both. Remember, what wood first does is it locks in the moisture, it keeps the wood alive from the inside out. So you now need to protect it from the outside in, and to do that you would put our Wood Love straight on top of it. So you wood first the article, you want to do the sides, tops, bottoms, you want to saturate it in the wood first, and then you want to varnish it with our Wood Love. A Wood Love was developed obviously for external use. More than that, it was developed in coastal areas where you have all forms of deterioration at play. So not just your extreme heat, in some cases extreme cold. You're obviously going to have high levels of moisture being in coastal conditions, but there's one other thing that you're going to have. You're going to have people coming off the beach onto your wooden deck, sanding it with their feet because they got sand on their feet. So this now needs to be hard enough and cure hard enough to be resistant to abrasion or the sanding by people's feet, but remain flexible enough to move with the elements. In other words, to expand and contract as the elements and the conditions change around it. So that's your combination wood care range there. Wood first into the wood, wood love onto the wood. Wood first, of course, is going to give you a more natural, more matte finish, where the wood love is a varnish, so it's going to impart a gloss or an amount of sheen, reflective properties to the wood. If your client is insistent on a natural look, then stick with the wood first, but know that it's going to be more frequent maintenance intervals required, so you're going to be recoating that wood every 18 months to 3 years. Whereas with the wood love, you do at least 3 years without having to assess it again. So good combination wood care range. If you have, and we've had it before, clients who are insistent on a 6-star green star rating, you can use our water-based varnish, which is the last one on the list there. That's our Artifacts glaze coat. So this product was actually developed as a glazing or a clear gloss coating going over murals, graffiti, paint technique work, that type of thing. So if you look at Monte Cassino as a great example, there's our Pristina being used to do the mottling and the aging and antiquing of the walls, with our glaze coat going over it to then protect that artwork, because they're not going to repaint Monte Cassino every couple of years. That type of stuff is done maybe once every 10 to 15 years. So to protect it and give it that longevity, you've used our water-based varnish over that. Of course, you can use it on wood in just the same way. It's going to impart a gloss, and it's going to give you a surface that is resistant to the elements, so your wood, so your rain and your harsh UV. That's your Artifacts glaze coat. So before we can leave site, customers pulled us in and said, "You've done such an amazing job on the house, the roof, the trims, my cladding. Wow. Do you think you can fix my pool as well?" So we actually have a pool care range. As I mentioned, we've got over 50 different products, and prime among them is our epoxy range. So our pool care range is developed as a paintable system. So as an alternative to remarbleiting, or in fact fiberglassing pools, it's suitable for concrete pools and Marblite shells or Marblite pools, any porous masonry type pool or pond structure that you want to refurbish, you can use our epoxy prime. So epoxy, the inference there is that it's a catalyzed product, so you've got part A and part B. You need to mix the catalyst into the base. A lot of people refer to the catalyst as the hardener. Well, it is the hardener, that's exactly what it does. You mix this into your base. You want to make sure that you get absolutely every gram of that hardener into the base. Best way to do this, take a tin opener, cut off the bottom of your catalyst tin, and dump that into your base, making sure that you get it all in there. It's a thermogenic reaction, so in other words, you've got a window period in which to use this product. It's about 30 minutes on a day like today. So you want to work in batches or quantities that you know you can get onto the surface in the allocated time. So I mentioned about 30 minutes. That's once you've mixed your base, once you've mixed your catalyst into your base. This window will get smaller if your product is left in the sun. So a good idea to keep it in shaded areas, keep the lid on it. That's going to increase your window time to apply it, although you should be working in small enough batches that you can apply this directly to your emptied and cleaned pond or pool surface. It can also be used on garage floors. For example, if you've got persistent damp rising through your garage floor, you would apply epoxy prime. And why we recommend epoxy prime is it creates what's known as an osmotic barrier. So in a pool scenario or a pond scenario, you've got pressure from the backfilled area behind the shell, but once you put water in it, you've now got pressure as well from the water. And there are very, very few coatings which can withstand pressure from both sides. For this, you need an osmotic barrier, a barrier which is resistant to pressures from both sides. And that's what the epoxy primer will achieve. Of course, follow the data sheets, make sure you've applied it to the right film build and that the entire surface is fully saturated. Any areas of compromise, any holes or gaps or areas left uncoated with the barrier are then going to be susceptible to damp or pressure pushing through it. So I mentioned you can use this on pools and ponds and garage floors. You can also use it in metal tanks for potable water. There are a multitude of uses for it. We've actually used it in glass balustrades where you have aluminium uprights and you've got channels that the glass slides into. You fill them up with the epoxy, inset the glass, and they never come out. You have to smash the glass to get them out. Stops them rattling in the wind or compromising or bending the frame. So that's really your pools and ponds solution. For smaller ponds, duck ponds and fish ponds, you can use an acrylic system. So there again, our Aquamat or Aquaseal with the white membrane. You can even use our Acrylatex 2K with the grey membrane. If you want a nice natural looking pond, you just leave it like that. On the other two options, I'd suggest you paint it with either the Aquaseal top coats or the Elegance. You can even use our Ruvacryl if you find the right colour for you there. So that's waterproofing of pools, ponds, cellars. These days it's not really cellars, it's more movie theatres and man caves and games rooms. Anything that's underground is going to be susceptible from damp pressure around it. So you want to make sure that it's adequately tanked off, as we call it, or damp proofed against those effects, the pressure from the backfill. Okay, so you've paid your guys, they've left site, you are wheels up with all your tools packed away, and as you're reversing down the driveway, the client calls you back and says, shit, you know what, you did such a good job on the outside, don't you want to have a look at the inside of my house as well? So not wanting to turn down money or turn down jobs where you find them, of course you're going to entertain this, and you're going to go inside and have a look. Now, because internal surfaces aren't subject to your rain or your harsh UV, they don't tend to deteriorate or break down as readily as your external surfaces, but there is a degree of deterioration that we have to be mindful of, and some differences in the type of deterioration that you'll experience. So first you'll see on your list there in your books is mold and mildew. Now remember, we have fungus and algae on the outside, but inside, in your shower ceilings, in your pantry cupboards, areas maybe under your kitchen sink, you have the precipitation off your pipework there, if it's copper pipes. These are going to lead to biocontaminant in the form of mold and mildew. It's normally characterized by little black spots all over the surface. They can grow into almost thumbprint size mildew spores. It's another active or living biocontaminant. It needs to be neutralized, cannot simply be painted over. And to do that, now you guys know, you're going to use your Shefu, diluted 1:19 with water. You're going to scrub the surface, let it react for an hour or two, and then rinse the surface with fresh water. What you'll find after applying the Shefu is that the mildew or mold spore that you apply to actually changes color. You can see that it's dead. It goes from a dark black spot to a brown, almost dusty. If you were to touch it, you would be able to scrape it away. It dies in front of your eyes. It dies. So you'll know when it's suitable to clean these surfaces then of the biocide that you've treated. If it does leave any type of staining on the surface, which can happen if left untreated for a number of years, you need to put a barrier coat over that staining. Look, a high quality paint like ours, more often than not, you can just paint over it and it's never going to bleed through. But for your information, if the client's asked you to use something else, maybe a lesser quality paint, it's a good idea to put a universal undercoat in between the two that's going to barrier the surface from that stain leaching through and spoiling your newly applied paint, which more often than not is going to be white. So you bet your ass you're going to see it if it does. So that's going to be in your kitchen, in the cupboards, or in a bathroom ceiling above a shower, for example. There are other types of staining to be mindful of. So if you get like a cigar room or a room that's allocated as the smoking room, normally the study or the computer room, you get yellowing of the walls, yellowing of the ceiling. This is actually the nicotine from your cigarette smoke leaching and staining the walls. If you paint over this, not only will you compromise the adhesion of your new paint because it's actually quite a slippery substance, but it'll almost always bleed through and give a yellow tinge to your new paint. So you need to neutralize this, and to do that you would use our universal undercoat, but not just any universal undercoat. Use our Unisub, which is the top end version of this product. It's got a very strong protective barrier that it creates, so that's going to be resistant to not just your nicotine staining or your reoccurring mildew stains, but even carbon staining. So your output from computers, maybe on your garage walls where you have a buildup of soot that would otherwise stain the paint film, you would then bury it off with our Unisub. Of course, to clean any of these stains off, like your soot stains, you would use our grime reaper with the coarse particle to lift the grime from the surface, and then apply our Unisub on top of that. So that's going to be your barrier coating. So I'm sure all of you would have seen yellowing of enamels inside as well. This is something you'll have to look out for. Typically on your doorways where you've got painted door frames, or even the doors themselves, if they were painted with a alkyd or solvent-based enamel, like your gloss enamel, what actually happens is outside, they chalk and break down in the sun, but inside the alkyd reacts to shade or darkness, and it actually yellows. That's why they go yellow. It's nothing that the client's doing special in the house that's turning them yellow. It's the effect of it being in darkness or in the shade. They turn yellow. That's the nature of an alkyd. So where this has happened, you can renew or change this coating type out to our EnviroCoat. EnviroCoat is probably my favorite product of our range. It is a enamel substitute or alternative to enamel. It gets very, very hard like enamel does. However, it is still very, very flexible like a good acrylic. It's brilliant white. So the difference there is with solvent-based stuff, you are limited in the type of white titanium dioxide you can put in there to give it its whiteness. With acrylic and water-based, you can use any type of titanium to give it whiteness. Paintcore does, and always will use the most expensive imported form of titanium dioxide, which actually gives you a blue-white. When you compare the two alongside each other, it's very apparent, but what most people don't know is that blue tinge is actually making it look more white than a yellow tinge, or yellow tinge is synonymous with a lower grade titanium. So EnviroCoat uses our blue-white titanium, and that's what gives you that white, that whiteness on the surface, which will never yellow and will never chalk outside in the sun. It's nearly bulletproof, this stuff. EnviroCoat's guaranteed for 10 years against all forms of deterioration. Elastic, it's waterproof, can be used on pretty much anything, and especially over yellowing enamel indoors. If you really want to blow the socks off your client and give them a white finish that's never going to deteriorate or diminish, go with EnviroCoat. Unfortunately, you'll probably never hear from them again because they won't need anything painted, but they're always going to look back and think, well, that was the change that counted there to the water-based stuff. So that's your EnviroCoat. You do have instances of damp on internal structures. So Brett mentioned earlier where a lot of homes are being developed or built these days with split levels. So you've got backfilled walls, areas that are susceptible to damp. You've got potting beds right up alongside the external walls of your home or your house buildings, and that's going to allow water to get in, migrate through the brickwork and cause problems on internal surfaces. So we'd need to take care of damp in much the same way as we did on the outside, either by removing the plaster and tanking it and using the acrylatex in the plaster. Where it's just paint that's come away, you scrape the paint off and apply a damp prime. And that's going to take care of your internal damp issues. I mentioned alkalinity attack or pH burn. This can happen just the same on internal surfaces. So a mottling of the paint, a discoloring or changing of the appearance of the paint. More often than not, the result of water getting in behind it. So you need to barrier that off. You can't simply identify it and then paint over it. To do that, put on our plaster primer tray, the solvent-based version of our plaster primers. That's going to give you a barrier coating to prevent the leaching through of that alkalinity attacking your new paint film. Finally, your last list of different surface types for the inside, just to be mindful of what type of areas or problems that can present on internal surfaces. We have a product, Brett mentioned it earlier as well, called GTP or Glazed Tile Primer. This product is a very easy to use, supplied ready for use product that can be applied straight to ceramic or sealed porcelain tiles. It'll prime those tiles and then allow you to paint any one of our top coats over them. So EnduraCoat, Elegance, EnviroCoat, Ruvacryl if you want, our enamels for example if you want to apply that as a top coat. So that can be used over tiles in the bathroom, in fact any sealed or glazed tile anywhere in the house. You can also use that product on melamine. So your countertops, your cupboard doors, you would prime it first with the GTP or glazed tile primer and then apply your top coat of choice. Remember, all of these surfaces are subjected to a lot of handling, so they very often have hand fat or sediment in the form of natural greases and oils that have come off from your hands. If you paint over this, the paint will split over those areas and the job will be compromised. So you need to neutralize and wash these areas down using our Grime Reaper, first prize. Sunlight liquid does work, but it might not get rid of all the hand fat, so rather just keep a tin of our Grime Reaper, scrub it down with that and then wash it off. And that's going to remove any fatty acids from your high hand traffic areas. We then also have the tendency these days to decorate our homes with a lot of industrial type fittings, so your brass, your copper, your aluminium, as I said before. We have a product which can be used to prime and paint these. That's our All Prime Plus. Brett mentioned it as well. That's your coastal ready acid etch primer. So if you need to paint brass or copper or any special metal for that matter, you would use our All Prime Plus. If you go and look at the Versace store in Santon City, they've got a massive Versace brass facade at the entrance to the shop. That's our Grime Reaper to clean it down, All Prime Plus to prime it, and black Envirocoat on top of it to finish it. So really, really impressive. There isn't another primer out there on the market that can prime brass, copper and aluminium. Right, I think I mentioned already the use of our Cementec on concrete. So your garage floor screeds, your driveway concrete, or your molded concrete surfaces, that's going to seal and protect it from the elements. If you want to paint these fixtures, you could use our floor coat. So floor coat is a polyurethane alkyd blend. It gets very, very hard, very chemical resistant, very easy to clean and easy to apply, and available in a range of standard colors, but we can tint it as well to a color of your choice, and that's your polyurethane floor coat. Very good for garage floors or high traffic areas where potentially there's going to be something other than high heels and tackies going over it, so maybe trolleys, workshop floors. There you would rather use the polyurethane. It's a bit more hard wearing. Or you could use our terra firma. Again, as I said, if this is a floor that extends from inside to outside and you want one product type, finish and color, then go with our terra firma. Also very hard wearing, doesn't have the same chemical resistance as the floor coat, but equally hard wearing and accommodates a slightly bigger range of colors as well. And that you could also use on garden furniture, pots. There's a lot of things you can use terra firma. Anything that's going to sit outside and on the ground, you can paint it with terra firma. And then finally, the last specialized internal surface that you come across very often these days is Rhinolite. Nobody builds straight anymore, so Rhinolite is used to render the walls straight and smooth. Where you've chosen to do this, you need to obviously seal it, bind it up, and provide a sound base on which to apply subsequent coats. So to do that, you're going to use our Rhino Seal or any one of our plaster primers. We have an alternative to Rhinolite, and that is our Flash Skim. Flash Skim, a lot of you already know, it's a very, very popular product. It's a skimming compound supplied ready for use. Use with a steel trowel, skim the wall. It's going to give you an alternative way of achieving your smooth, straight Rhinolite type cast or finish, and that's using our Flash Skim. Remember, it doesn't need priming. You can apply your top coat straight onto the Flash Skim. Yeah, and that's the end of this slide.